Well, today I'm speaking with Benny Wills, and Benny, your background is a really interesting one. So, poetry, comedy, and communication. And a
Yep.
friend of mine sent me some of your work recently, and I started looking at what you do, and I'm really interested in having a conversation with you about how you got into all of this and what you're working on. So, and specifically about, and I'll get into that if you don't mind, but specifically a blog post that you made that I found really interesting, and it lines up with some stuff that I've been really interested in lately. But more generally, just can you maybe say a little bit about your background and what got you where you are?
Sure. Yeah, I'll try to give the bullet point version. Yeah, so I'm from Los Angeles. I'm originally, well, my first career path was that of an actor. I have a master's degree in classical theater, and I started off doing sketch comedy in 2012 with a group called JoyCamp, which got semi-popular amongst truthers. It's basically, we called it conscious comedy, but it was more making light of conspiracies in a way to disarm people so that people could approach some more taboo subjects with a with more lightheartedness. And that sort of evolved into a personal path. I started writing poetry, which got me invited to all kinds of truth, freedom, liberty conferences around the world, which led to emceeing those same conferences. And then from there, in 2020, since everything was kind of on pause, I really, I don't know, after being sort of in the game for so long, I decided to finally try to help people in some way.
Mm.
So I chose communication because I could tell at the beginning of 2020 that regardless of what the truth was about the pandemic, I knew that it was going to divide people because I've been on this ride for so long. I know how polarizing major events can be, and it really just splits people. So I wanted to be able to catch people who were inevitably going to have those difficult conversations about COVID and, try to help marriages not fall apart, families not fall apart, help employees not get fired from their jobs, et cetera, and just be able to represent themselves well in those difficult conversations so that we don't fuel the divide further.
Mhm.
And that evolved into a men's coaching program, which I've been doing for a year now, because through the communication class, I recognize an underlying problem with which is sort of put it generally like stagnation in guys,
Mm.
lack of purpose, and sort of defeated. There's so many people who are defeated and feeling hopeless because of their awareness of how bad things are. So trying to help guys work through that and get their lives back on track so they can actually contribute something, because that's ultimately how we actually solve things, is by stepping in our own power and seeing what we're capable of.
Mm. Yeah, I think that the COVID polarization that you touched on there, it was so striking how people fell apart and fell out with people that were important to them over that topic. And so what were some of the ways that you helped people to communicate and to stay connected despite serious differences?
It's a great question. So I drew from my own experience. Now, that other major event that happened in September of 2001 happened when I was a senior in high school.
Mm.
And, back then the internet wasn't as quick to pick up on things. Maybe it was, and I just wasn't aware of it, but I had dial-up internet. Anyway, I didn't have access to information like we do now.
Mhm.
And so a couple of years went by, and then I caught wind of some of the counter perspectives on that.
Mhm.
And I went deep down the rabbit hole. And I didn't know that that would label me a conspiracy theorist. To me, it was just, oh my gosh, this is important information. People need to hear it. So
Mhm.
as a 20 something, I was really passionate about conveying information and getting people to understand. And I was met with such resistance back then that I realized I had to refine my ability to communicate. And this is whatever now, 17 years ago or so. So then over the course of the next 17 years, I've been figuring out a way to reach people through communication. That's where my comedy came from. That's where my poetry came from. That's all in a way to, you know, discuss and relay important perspectives in a way that people can actually hear them.
Mhm.
So I've been, without realizing it, perfecting an approach to communication that works so that people can actually have those difficult conversations without getting angry with each other, how to represent themselves well, and actually make some progress. So with that, as far as strategy goes, I mean, in the program, some of the things I emphasize are intent. So knowing what your intention is, and I get that from my acting background.
Mhm.
So in doing theater for so long and creating characters for the stage, you are smarter than the character you're playing. And you have to understand what's motivating that character, even if the character doesn't know. You
Mhm.
have to be able to take them on a journey, which is why how the audience is able to follow the character's journey from
Mhm.
point A to point Z. So you have to understand what is behind what the person is saying every step of the way. You
Mhm.
have to be the psychologist behind the character. And a lot of times we get into these conversations without recognizing what our intent is.
Mhm. Mhm.
So a lot of people, I think, without realizing it, have the intention of changing someone's mind. And I
Mhm.
think that is an ineffective strategy. You have to present information in a way that doesn't turn them away or make them angry or trigger some response. So it's really about casually bringing things up in a way that isn't that you're not too attached, and you can ask questions, some really basic communication tenets like building the rapport, establishing the rapport first, making sure you're on the same team as the person so that you're both coming at it with solutions in mind and wanting to solve the problems.
Mhm.
So I have all kinds of strategies, but intent is like the major one. And sometimes just by recognizing your own intention, it makes it so that first, you don't even need to have the conversation. Or if you do, you know better how to represent yourself because it's not about changing their mind. It's about really just getting them to mm, open a door for themselves that hopefully they'll walk through because people don't want you to be their teacher.
Mhm.
They don't want you to be the one who changes their mind because that's a threat to their identity. So you have to be
Mhm.
really careful how you present these topics because you don't want to put more distance between them and the topic you want them to understand. But if you can somehow lay it out in a way that makes them want to know more themselves and then educate themselves and learn themselves without you ever getting the credit, that's sort of the goal. And
Mhm.
that's sort of what I help people with.
I really like that framework. And as you were talking about it, it occurred to me, I guess the way you presented it made me realize that there's something inherently condescending and disrespectful about entering a conversation thinking that you are going to change somebody else's mind. And it's much more respectful to think, here, I have something that you might be interested in, but without an attachment to the outcome.
Exactly.
Mm. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really great. I think that's wonderful advice. Uh it was such a hard time for so many people, and there are so many of these issues that have been like that. We feels like we're living in a time of one after the other big political or social issues for people to fall apart on rather than
Mhm.
working on connection.
Yes. And I mean, divide and conquer is the oldest trick in the book.
Mm,
And we're living in this hyperpolarized era where we're being fractalized into these different camps, and critical thinking is out the window. And so is just general respect for each other.
mhm,
A lot of people, people who I work with, they make the mistake of writing people off forever because they don't see things a certain way, and they demean them as well. So like you said, condescending, there is this air now, no matter where you fall on like the opinion spectrum,
mhm,
they feel like they're the smart ones and everyone is the stupid ones,
mhm,
rather than understanding where the person's coming from.
mhm,
I was actually just talking about this on a coaching call the other day. The idea behind a debate class, I
mhm,
think, is so important because in a debate class in school, you have to take on the counter perspective as if it were your own. So
mhm,
you have to map out, you have to be able to represent their argument better than they can. And
mhm,
therefore you have to really understand where they're coming from. And
mhm,
we don't do that. We just write people off. We are mean to them or we judge them. And that's no way to solve the problem. You have to really put yourself in their shoes. And with that event in 2020 in particular, people were coming from a place of fear. They
Mhm.
were making their decisions based on fear. So you're dealing with a person who's in a fear state. The worst thing you can do is be mean to them or yell at them or judge them. You have to like really dig deep and have that patience. And yeah, again, put yourself in their shoes and, try to bring perspective into the conversation without making the situation worse.
Mhm. 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 You mentioned that in working with people, you found that there was a stagnation, I think you said, in men, and this
Mm,
overwhelm because of the problems that we perceive outside of ourselves. And I see
mm,
that a lot too, especially talking with young people, that there's an overwhelm in thinking about the problems of the world, like that whole phrase that you hear, how could you bring a child into this world? And I've seen somebody recently, I saw this comment, it would be child abuse to bring a child into this world. And so that's this idea that the world is so oppressively terrible and scary, and that we are powerless within it. And I, I'm interested in, how do you reframe and help people kind of back away from that sense of hopeless overwhelm?
I think people aren't seeing the big picture
Mhm.
enough, or they're not considering the bigger picture. I think that this is the challenge of any era you live in. You're always grappling with, because we have this gift of free will, and I do believe we have free will, you do with that what you will. And some people choose to not walk a path of righteousness or kindness or helpfulness. They are selfish and they have their own plans and they try to get whatever they want. And you have to just, that's part of the experience. You can't change, you can't force someone to be better. So every era has a different flavor of, however you want to call it, tyranny or control, power grabbing. This is just our current flavor.
Mhm.
But humanity always persists. Doesn't mean that there's not turbulence or trouble or things to be concerned about at any point, but it's like that's the situation, because you're dealing with people who sometimes don't have other people's best interest at heart. And it's up to you to see that and then internalize it and sort of alchemize it into something positive. So how do you take your knowledge and your awareness, and instead of just letting it fester inside of you and make you angry and hopeless, but actually turn it into something helpful for others? How do you turn that into a service? How do you become, you know, uh, an agent for good in the world
Mhm.
to counteract what you perceive as evil? I think that's the key. And that's really helped me in a big picture, because I'm obsessed with reading, and I really have been doing deep dives into history lately, and just reading accounts. And there's always a percentage of the population who thinks all is lost, we're all doomed, humanity's going to die, it's all over, and we should stop having kids.
Mhm.
That always exists.
Mhm.
And yet here we are. And I think we're going to be okay, collectively okay, as long as people don't give up. I mean, that's the key. You have to not give up.
Mhm.
If you give up, they've already won.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, it's a really optimistic look, and I do think that that's, I like the perspective that you draw there, that this is something we've always dealt with throughout the ages, maybe in different forms, but people have always had this kind of, you're kind of a victim of your circumstances. You are, or not, victim, or you're just a part of your circumstance, or your circumstances in which you live impact your life in a variety of ways. And so this is how it is right now, but it doesn't mean that it hasn't always been like this to some extent.
Yeah.
That's a big babbly sentence.
Well,
um,
and then we always, and you push the ball forward.
yeah,
Again, like we're looking at a grand scheme. Our little individual lives
yeah.
are so short.
Hmm.
So if you see that the world needs help, well, you have to take that upon yourself to provide that in whatever way you're uniquely qualified to do.
Hmm.
And that's how we push the ball forward in our little
Hmm.
way. And then you help others do the same. I mean, I'm helping people right now. People are whatever inspired by my work, or they
Hmm.
work with me. And then if they become activated, they can reach people that I can't,
Hmm.
and they can help people in ways that I can't, that I'm unable to. And then it becomes this individual process of moving, balancing the scales perpetually forever. I
Mhm.
think that's sort of the goal.
Well, and in your work with men specifically, and this kind of segues into the post, your blog post that was how I found you. I have increasingly, as I've been looking into what's going on socially and having these conversations, I have become increasingly aware of one particular aspect of our culture that has seems like broad tentacles and has a great impact on people, and that's pornography. And you made a post recently called Porn's Plan for You. And when we were just speaking right before I hit record, I said, this is kind of a one-off for you, isn't it? It's like you haven't really, this doesn't seem like it's been a topic that you've spent a lot of time on in your other work. And so what made you dig into this topic, and how did this come up in your work?
It's a great question. Well, I think it's a one-off. I think it's only emerged now, let's say,
Mhm,
because I don't like talking about it. I mean, it's a gross habit and it's a
mhm,
gross world to like look into.
mhm.
So I've always sort of shied away from it just because I don't like how it makes me feel when I research it or talk
Yeah.
about it. But because it is such a pervasive issue, and because so many of the guys I work with are currently or have struggled with a porn addiction, it seems like I had to say something. And because in my sort of research online, there's a lot of people offering advice and solutions and helping people overcome the habit. So it's like it's an obvious problem that's not like it's being ignored. It's very much being
Mhm,
tackled by people. But a lot of the a lot of the aspects of it that helped me really move away from it completely don't get talked about. And that's sort of like the history of the sort of pornography invasion in the last 70 or 80 years and how that's, evolved into this nasty problem for guys. And then you go a little deeper and then I look at it more like on a, how do I say this? On a spiritual level, I guess,
mhm,
and how there is everyone is under attack in a way,
mhm,
but men are really um, attacked in particular ways to weaken them, because I think that if men are kept from being strong and kept from realizing their own power, then the governing power has more influence. So the
mhm,
more you weaken men, the more likely we are to fall into these, traps that we're seeing now. So I think that's intentional. So we
mhm,
weaken men in a variety of ways, and pornography is one of those ways,
mhm,
big time.
mhm,
And that's sort of why I jumped into it. Just so many guys. I mean, the first session I had with this men's coaching group last summer, I asked them who here has struggled with porn before.
mhm,
Every single hand went up, including mine.
mhm,
I'm not on full transparency. I mean, I struggle with it as well. It's a real problem.
mhm,
So I finally decided to throw my hat into the ring. And
mhm.
what's, I guess, not so surprising, I guess, it's been of my newsletters, which I've been writing now for about 5 or 6 months, I had the most response to that one. More
Really?
people have reached out to me about that than any of the other ones I've written.
Mhm,
And even one of my best friends called me and he's like, this is something that you could probably lean into to increase your reach and find more people to work with and
mhm,
whatever, because it is such a problem. And I thought, you're probably right. I don't really want to be that guy, but at least in this particular newsletter, I had to call attention to it.
mhm. Well, it seems like a lot of people are that guy. I mean, it's a problem that's when you said who struggles with porn, the word struggle, it's like this is not for many people a happy pastime, that they're completely at peace with their relationship to this. For a lot of people, it's really very fraught.
Yeah, I'd say probably 99% of men will not want to admit that they have a porn problem.
Mhm, mhm. Well, and you said that you think that education about where it comes from and what the history of this industry or this phenomenon, whatever you want to, however you want to conceptualize what it is, is a helpful, it's helpful to look at that and understand what you're dealing with in putting your issue with porn in perspective and quitting it. So
Yeah.
what did you discover as you were researching it? Because for me, one of the things that I I've been very interested in this topic as I've seen it be, uh, as I've delved into it and talked about it more and talked with people more, I've discovered that it's much more pervasive than I realized. But I have no desire to go and actually look at it. I want to stay away from it. So here I am talking about it from outside of it. I don't want to go and research what's going on Pornhub. I hear people saying that it's more violent and that there's a lot more, that the content is misogynist and very rough, and but I can't validate that. I can't vouch for that because I don't want to do the research that it would take
Yeah.
firsthand.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what's trending in the porn world either, and I wouldn't want to know because I don't want to subject myself to
Mm.
watching any of that. Uh, so this started about, let's see, when did I really decide to kick the habit? So for me, if I'm being honest, like I didn't even consider my porn habit a problem because I didn't really have any, I don't know, moral basis to stand on. I just got into the habit as a teenager and then as a 20 something, as a single guy. And it was just something I would do, when I felt like it. And I didn't even think anything of it
Mm-hmm.
until it came to the point where I thought I probably shouldn't do this anymore. And that was around the time I met my wife.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was clear. It's like, oh, actually, this is really a lot harder to
Mm-hmm.
purge from my system than I thought. It was way harder than quitting other things like smoking pot or drinking or
Mm-hmm.
smoking cigarettes. And I thought that's an interesting experience to go through the withdrawal from this.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't until that point that I was like, okay, this really has deep, it's got its claws in me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then naturally being whatever, a conspiracy guy, I started looking into the rabbit holes or surrounding it. It first started with me, and this is again, personal journey. I started looking at interviews of porn stars that I was into
Mm-hmm.
and just hearing them speak as people and not seeing them in their scenes. And something about that just really turned me off because I saw the human. I saw
Mm-hmm.
these girls, saw them without their makeup on, just talking about their lives. And I was like, whoa, it just brought it home, it
Mm-hmm.
humanized them.
Mm-hmm.
And that made me not interested in them. And then beyond that, I don't know, looking into the history of the pornography or the pornographic magazines of the 20th century, looking at the background, the history of Playboy and Hustler and Penthouse, and you can uncover some really dark stuff. Hugh Hefner is in a way like idolized
Mm-hmm.
and admired and worshiped by a lot of people. He's a hero in
Mm-hmm.
certain people's eyes. But if you look at his background and he was really into Kinsey and Kinsey's research. And one of the aspects of Kinsey's research was saying that all humans, no matter what age, are sexual beings.
Mm-hmm.
Babies, children, toddlers, they're all sexual beings. And he really bought into Kinsey's whole philosophy. And he even donated, I think, I don't want to get, okay, just, I don't have the facts on right at my fingertips, but I think that he donated money to the Kinsey Research Institute and stuff with profits he got from Playboy. But anyway, what really got me was I saw a little documentary that I don't know who made it, but it popped up on YouTube back when YouTube had such content. And it was about the dark history of these magazines.
Mm-hmm.
And it really focused in on this report from 1983 where a woman had analyzed and her team had analyzed every single issue of Playboy, Hustler, and Penthouse up until that point, up until 1983. And they found, I think it was over 9,000 images of, I hesitate to even say the word, but
Mm-hmm.
pedophilic imagery.
Oh, wow.
And not only that, but just violence against children. And then they show in the documentary the actual cartoons. It's always the cartoons.
Mm-hmm.
Playboy has its cartoons.
Okay.
9,000 images, which is like 8 or 9 per issue of each one of
That's
these
a lot.
magazines. Right. And they go in between. So they're embedded in between, interviews with Jimmy Carter and then the spread of a beautiful woman naked. And it's you flip the page and then you see a child getting raped. You flip the
Mm.
page and you read an interview with Jimmy Carter. So it was
Mm.
like
Wow.
part of this. And that really, I don't know, that like triggered something in me. And then there's a guy in the documentary who was a photographer for Penthouse, and he says that the thing about porn, and I think a lot of guys understand this, the more you watch it, the more the content you're familiar with watching becomes less interesting.
Mm.
So you want to
Mm.
see something that's a little racier, a little kinkier,
Mm.
a little more naughty. And if you become too into that, a lot of some of the guys I work with, I mean, they have like really bad porn habits.
Mm.
Um, and the more you give into that, the deeper it goes. It will inevitably lead somebody to younger and
Content with
younger.
children.
Right. And then in doing my research for this newsletter and sort of bringing it up to the 20, and this is 1983. They
Mm.
found all this. I mean, and even the guy who was the cartoonist for Hustler, he went to prison in 1989 for raping his daughter. Larry
Wow.
Flint from Hustler,
Mm.
his daughter said in a book that he raped her when she was 9 years old. So this stuff is, and he
Oh
never went
my
to prison because
gosh.
he was probably protected. Uh,
Wow.
so that this is all 1983, and then think about how porn has grown,
Mm.
and since then, my entire life, I was born in 1983, and how easily it is to access.
Mm.
And then looking into what's trending now, I mean, in 2014, teen porn was
Mm.
the number one search on all porn platforms.
Wow.
And it's still in the top 10. I guess luckily it's not the number one anymore,
Mm.
but it's still in the
Mm.
top 10, and barely legal is another one of the top
Mm. Mm.
terms. And then on TikTok, there's a hashtag called Kink Talk, which has 6.9 billion clicks.
Mm.
And it's teenagers who are putting themselves in like violent sexual situations. It's
Wow.
kink.
Wow.
And these are teenagers. Like hashtag choke is another big one on TikTok.
Mm. Mm.
So it's gotten really out of hand. Yeah, I don't even know
Yeah.
where else to go with that, because there's a lot to say. But
Do you,
that
do you remember the
there's a
name of
poor
that documentary that you were talking about? Sorry to cut you off.
it had something like Playboy's Dark Secrets or
Okay.
the history of Playboy. It was something like that, but I don't think it exists anymore.
Oh, really?
I have my notes from it still, which is how I was able to
Oh,
write the article.
well, I
But
want to find that if it's out there. That would be really interesting to see.
if it exists somewhere, it's probably on BitChute.
Okay.
But uh, what was I going to say about 21st century? I forgot. Anyway, yeah,
Sorry, I totally derailed you there.
needless to say, it's gotten really bad, and I could say more, but I'll pause there.
Yeah, it's so you talked about the sort of this escalation, this downward spiral of wanting to see more shocking content, I suppose. And that's something I've heard over and over as I've talked with people who
Yeah.
are in recovery coaching, or just regular people who are private individuals who talk about their own experience, that it does sort of it seems like the so-called vanilla stuff is not sufficient for very long before you start wanting to see more and more. And do you find that to be a trend in most of the people that you speak with?
Well, I don't know, to be honest, because I
Hmm.
don't dig into what they're actually searching for. I'm just trying to help them overcome the habit.
Yeah.
But I would assume so, because I
Hmm.
know from just the conversations I've had with friends and whatnot, I know that there is a tendency to look at things that you wouldn't experience in your personal sex life.
Hmm. Hmm.
And,
Yeah.
and it's not to say, and I want to say, like, it doesn't mean that if you're a porn addict, you're guaranteed to become someone who, fantasizes about young girls. It's just it's definitely an avenue that people get directed towards.
Hmm. Hmm. The dehumanization that you mentioned, and that rehumanization of actually watching the girls talk and learning about them as people a little bit, that was really interesting. And I don't know. I don't know if I have a specific question around that so much as just an observation that that seeing that effect on yourself of oh well, she's like a person, she has friends and she maybe calls her mom and she's she's got this interest or that interest, or you can start to visualize an entire human being rather than just a a visual depiction of some act.
Right. And I almost included that detail in my article, but because it's been so long since I did that,
Yeah.
when I tried to validate that today in
Yeah.
2024, and now porn has become so mainstream, I couldn't find those same kinds of interviews. Now, if you look up a porn star interview,
Oh.
you see them, on a podcast or on a YouTube channel talking about their scenes, and they're still playing the character that they're trying
Mm-hmm.
to, be known as. And
Mm-hmm.
it's much harder to find the content of them being real and stripped
Mm-hmm.
down. So I didn't
Mm-hmm.
recommend it because if you that could actually, I didn't want to set off someone's trigger. I say, go look
Okay.
up an interview with a porn star. It might actually make them want to watch porn. So I didn't
Yeah,
include it.
it's almost like marketing materials.
Yeah. Well, it's because
Yeah.
everyone has a podcast and has their social media outlet. So it's not as, I
Mm-hmm.
found it a lot more difficult to find that raw, just, them as people videos
Mm-hmm. Something that I keep
without their makeup
seeing.
on.
Yeah, and I saw a documentary. Someone just sent me this one. I think it's called 10 million throwaways or 10,000 throwaways, and it's
Hmm.
about how women are kind of chewed up and spit out by pornography. And it was interesting because there were a few of those sorts of candid interviews, but I I I see this. I've seen a few interviews with ex porn performers
Hmm.
that there's this tendency to really regret or talk about their experience as if it was difficult and awful. But then you see these interviews, like you said, with these podcasts and these interviews with current performers that really glorify what they're doing. And so it's difficult to really get a handle on who's at what point in the life cycle of a woman who's now doing this, but later won't be, because she won't be beautiful anymore, or she won't be desirable by the people who are paying her to do this right now anymore. Will she look back and regret it? And is it just a natural part of that lifespan of a person who has done something like that? Or, I guess I find that very interesting.
Yeah, it's really, I found I've read those articles too, and there's
Hmm.
always like a handful of the same names you see pop up, the ex
Hmm.
porn stars,
Hmm.
but so many of them come and go, and you never hear from them again.
Hmm.
I mean, whatever, maybe they decide to lead normal lives, or they don't speak up about it, but I
Hmm.
don't know.
Hmm.
So many of them just, they hit a certain age and then they're just gone from the
Hmm.
industry, and their real names were never revealed, so you don't know what ever happened
Hmm.
to them.
Hmm. Well, and it sounds like one of the things that was really concerning to you as you started doing more research on this was the degree to which it involves children and underage people.
That was what scared me straight. It wasn't that I was afraid that it was going to happen to me. It was I saw so clearly the intent, and I thought I don't want to participate this at all.
Mm.
Like I don't. This is really awful. And yeah, I mean, I don't think it's. You can't prove it, but I don't think it's some more context. So another aspect of my article, I referenced Ted Bundy's, the serial killer Ted
Hmm.
Bundy, who killed a lot
Hmm.
of women.
Hmm.
Uh, his final interview, which he asked to give hours before he was executed. He wanted to give this interview, and he talked primarily about pornography and its influence it had on him. And
Really?
he says, among other things, in the interview, that he spent a lot of time in prison and he spent a lot of time around other guys in prison. And he said the number one thing that they all have in common is porn addiction.
Hmm.
All of them.
Hmm.
Now, again, that's not to say if you watch too much porn, you're going to become a serial killer or commit heinous crimes, rape people, or become someone who sexualizes children. But it's an interesting thing to point out.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
I can't remember what the context for that was.
Yeah, about the
Oh, I know
sexualization
what it
of
was.
children.
Well,
Yeah.
yes, but there's so much of a. I think this has something to do with why there's so much violence and sexual abuse of children in the
Hmm.
world. I mean,
Hmm.
I feel like it's not a coincidence that these rates have increased with the
Hmm.
increase of pornography.
Hmm.
Now, if you ever looked at those maps where you can like look at the pederasts in your neighborhood kind of thing, where you can see
Hmm.
where they live, and like every neighborhood has a handful of guys who are known sex offenders,
Mm-hmm.
that's pretty freaky. Why is this happening?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, something about the culture is warping people's minds. I don't think people are just born that way.
Mm-hmm.
So there's like things you can point to that make it seem pretty obvious where the influence is coming from.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really dark and disturbing. And the Ted Bundy thing, that's fascinating. It seems like it makes sense that something that teaches you to dehumanize other people or trains you in that would kick some people over the edge, or at least contribute to a mindset that's capable of doing bad things to people.
And it becomes like a, and I can again speak from personal experience and just from all the conversations I've had with guys, it's almost like you become possessed when you
Mm,
have that itch to watch porn.
mm,
Because the moment you're done, you can't turn the screen off fast enough. You
really?
feel
Mm,
disgusting. You just want to like move away from it and
mm,
pretend like you didn't do it.
yeah.
But up until that point, you're like your heart rate's up and you go into this state where you can't even, well, you have a hard time controlling yourself. To have
Mm,
that part of your mind that knows better, it just gets so dulled,
mm,
and then you get amped up and then you're just in this place, and then when it's over, you're back
mm,
and you just feel horrible about what you've just done. And
mm,
I actually encourage guys to sit in that moment, to
mm,
really, because that again, that helped me, rather than run away from that feeling, pretend like you didn't do it, but just sit there and like let it imprint on your body
mm,
and really feel it, really feel how disgusting you feel and how ashamed you feel. Not to make you feel shame in general, but just to feel that moment so that it can perhaps provide something to remember when you're heading into that possessed state.
mm,
Know what the outcome is going to be. Yes, you can do this, but remember what's on the other side.
mm,
And that really helped me, you know, resist those urges. And of course, after a certain point, you don't really think about it anymore. But
mm,
anything to help the guy not give in to the impulse, I felt like that was a really good one for me.
mm. That seems to tie really nicely back into your uh, educational bullet point about intention and intent, and kind
Mm,
of not hiding from the intent, understanding what's going on and being smarter than the character. I liked how you said that.
yeah.
Um, one thing that I think you used this phrase in your blog post about the over sexualization of boys and men. Was it something like that? And I thought, wow, that's really interesting, because I think that there's this cultural narrative that just has men painted as, well, they're just hypersexual. I'm not saying that they aren't, because I know that the sex drive is stronger in men, and we know that all the research tells us that, and our own experiences tell us that men have higher libidos, and for lots of reasons that smarter people than me can make sound very articulate. But just colloquially, and as from personal experience and life, we know that that's the case. But when you said something about hypersexualization or over-sexualization, that was really interesting, because it does send, there's this cultural message that says men shouldn't control themselves in that way.
Hmm.
And I don't know, what are your thoughts on that, and where am I wrong, and what led you
Well,
to say that?
mm, well, I think that, like you said, men are more easily aroused and
Mm-hmm.
more driven by sexual impulses. And I think we get exploited. It
Mm-hmm.
just gets, it gets exploited in us. And so much of marketing and, the ways that our attention is commandeered is so often through sex that we end up getting stuck in you know, our nether regions. And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
intentional. And again, if you have, if you think of like metaphorically, like imagine someone just grabbing someone's balls, holding them. Like that man is demasculated. He's being completely subdued.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
His manhood is being subdued. And that's sort of what's
Mm.
happening. They just like get us there because then we're
Wow.
not thinking empowered. We're just not in our bodies. We're just controlled and we're like releasing strength in a way and releasing energy. And I think this goes back to, I think this is, again, like beyond porn, just um, when there are entities in the world wanting to control, they have to keep a certain percentage of the population from being able to rise up against it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that they're there for the men are the first line of defense, so they have to go after them. I know I call my men's program the Self-Reliant Way, and it was really inspired by the essay called Self-Reliance by Ralph Waldo Emerson. And he wrote that in 1840, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And he says that, among other things, but the self-reliant man, the man who doesn't conform to society, is a threat to society. He says basically society is a sinking ship. You can't fix society, but you can have an influence on individuals. But you have to become an individual yourself. And he says in the essay, there is a conspiracy against manhood.
Mm-hmm.
And I take that to mean if a man realizes his power, if he trusts himself and believes in what he's capable of doing and achieving and what he can manifest into reality and inspire the world with, that becomes a threat to the established order.
Mm-hmm.
So a man who realizes his power, who says, you know what, I'm not going to follow these rules. I'm not going to listen to you. I'm not going to be afraid of what people think about me. I'm going to do this because I know it's important and I know that I can, and then achieve something. Then that's how society's influence turns to that guy and that man's leadership. So the more that there's an assault on manhood, the less likely there is to be any challenge or uprising against the authoritative, institutions and rule makers and the whatever, however you want to term that, the
Mm-hmm.
aspects of our world that keep people thinking and doing the things that keep them from, rising up and saying no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's hard to create a herd animal out of someone who has a lot of self reliance and autonomy.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, and it's usually that fear of criticism that keeps anyone from walking away. They don't want to be judged but
Hmm.
the person in the herd, because they don't want to be. They also, I think everyone deep down wants to be someone to be living a life that they
Hmm.
really like. So when they see someone else who's doing it, it makes them angry and jealous, and so we
Hmm.
we fear that feeling from others, so we don't do it ourselves. And anyway, that's also the key to change and to really becoming who you were meant to be, is by
Hmm.
not caring what they think and doing it anyway. And then yeah, then that, how does he say it? Like in the essay, he says all of history is shaped by a handful of people. There's like a handful of people you can look at who like have these ideas all in their thoughts that became reality, and they influence the way that things go.
Hmm.
And we're all capable of such thoughts. We're all capable of literally creating something or building, bringing something into the world that could change the course of history, but rarely anyone does it or even attempts. And then by using something like pornography as a weapon
Hmm.
against men, it almost, you know, it's the odds are stacked even further against us.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's when you mention Emerson, and I think about people of uh, there have been a few times when I've received responses when I've talked about pornography. Heard from men who say, "Well, I have no prospects for a relationship. Maybe these are my circumstances. I'm never going to be in a relationship. What would you have me do? I need this. Like, this is something I need for release because otherwise I don't have anything. I would just be alone." And it seems like there's a sort of this idea that I'm lonely, I'm not in a relationship, and therefore I'm entitled to this as a proxy for a relationship. And what do you think about that in light of men in the past wouldn't have had something like this, so they would have had to have found some other way to make their life meaningful and to and what is the advent of porn as a balm for loneliness and involuntary celibacy?
I don't even know where to begin. I think, first of all, you can do whatever you want with your free will. And you have the you have to find the strength within yourself to decide to be better.
Mhm.
If you want to live your life blaming anything for your circumstances, then that's your life. And if I've learned anything from the reading books from throughout history and trying to really understand philosophy and just the wisdom of the ages, rules number 1 and 2 are no blaming and no complaining.
Mm.
Like that's it. Like that's, if you want to have any sort of path of enlightenment or personal evolution, you have to stop blaming anyone or anything for your problems. You have to stop complaining. It's up to you to be better. Now, there's all kinds of tools and, practices and modalities to help you, but it ultimately starts with your decision to say enough. I'm not going to live this way anymore. I'm not going to let these thoughts run my life. I'm not going to let circumstances control me. I'm going to change my circumstances.
Mhm.
The person has to decide that. And then once they decide it, then they're in motion and then they'll start, seeking out whatever they need to assist them.
Mhm.
But a guy who's stuck in that place, he's lost.
Mhm.
If you want to use that as an excuse, I'm lonely, therefore I watch pornography. Okay. Well, you also don't have to watch pornography. You can choose to be better. You can improve your life. You can start with your diet, your exercise, your mental clarity. You can change how you think about yourself and the world, but you have to decide it. But if you've already thrown up the white flag and say, well, my circumstances are so bad, then that's that. Like, well, then you're already dead.
Mhm.
You're
Mhm.
alive, but you have a pulse, but you're already dead.
Mhm.
Do you want to be alive? Do you want to live? Or do you want to just live out the rest of your days being mad at the world, mad at yourself, and angry at women because they're not attracted to you?
Mhm.
Make yourself attractive.
Mhm.
You have the power to change your one thing you have power over is your own vessel and your own
Mhm.
mind.
Mhm.
Very little else, actually. So
Mhm.
a guy has to really be ready to change. That's where I kind of intercept guys. I'm not trying to find guys who are stuck in a rut and not wanting to change. I want to find the guys who are, in a place of stagnation or feeling whatever, a little hopeless, but they have still that seed of determination to feel better. They want something different.
Mhm.
But if a guy is not wanting it, then I don't know. I wish them the best and I hope that something sparks something for them because
Mhm.
their life doesn't have to be over. They don't have to accept the circumstances as being the way things are.
Mhm. It's a message of responsibility and
And
hope.
accountability.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that's manhood. That's what like it means to be a man. You have to just suck it up
Mhm.
and accept that you have the power to change.
Mhm.
And no one else is to blame for your current situation but you.
And so in addition to the self-reliance coaching that you do, you have a newish venture, don't you, into men's coaching. Can you talk a little bit
Yeah.
about the program that you're working on?
Absolutely. So I'm launching a community, which should be ongoing month after month. And this is like the natural evolution of uh, my courses and my coaching that I'm actually surprised it's taking me this long to arrive at.
Mm.
Uh, because in the communication course I did, we did it in seasons and it was about 10 weeks and no one wanted it to end. So in these
Mhm.
workshops we were doing, people were meeting each other from all over the world and having, shared experiences and bonding with each other. And then when the 10 weeks was up, they're like, let's stay in touch. Let's keep doing this. But the program's over. So it ended. And the same thing happens with my coaching program. We go through 12 weeks. Everyone meets. We go in deep. We become vulnerable. We solve problems. We rally behind each other. Like, momentum is built. There's excitement, and then they're on their way. I thought, okay, I want to make sure that guys don't lose that momentum. So how do we do that? Well, the community is the way. So I'm
Mhm.
really putting all my effort into building a community of guys that's a low barrier of entry and that there's consistent work happening month after month after month. Because if we all put our heads together and are open with what we're struggling with, what we want, what our needs are, what our obstacles are through this collective experience, we can all help each other solve our problems. So then no one has any excuses.
Mhm.
We are solving all together in like this mastermind type situation, how to overcome any obstacle on our path for every individual,
Mhm.
whether it's health, wealth, relationships, or anything else.
Mhm.
So that's sort of the goal. And I brought together what I call my founding members already. So I've been building it with about 30, I think we're at 37 other guys right now.
Mm,
And we're currently constructing it and, building it out so it's ready to be amazing for all the guys who come on board.
mm,
And I should be launching it 2 or 3 weeks. Like it's almost ready.
mm,
So it's very exciting. But just based off the collective problems, just going back to your example of the guy who's like, well, this is my situation and I'm
mhm,
lonely and
mhm,
can't get girls. So in analyzing all the guys who are already in it, their problems and obstacles, so many of them fall under the category of mindset.
mm,
You have to be able to like fortify your mind. So many guys struggle with belief in themselves, or things like procrastination and not realizing their own worth, being afraid to do things, afraid of what people will think, uh, etc. And it all starts with strengthening your mind. So that's actually where the program is starting.
mhm,
But we have it all planned out for the next year, and it'll cover everything from financial freedom to spiritual well-being,
mhm,
health, and exercise, etc. So it's a program focused on excellence, men
mhm,
who want to be excellent, who want to live excellent lives, because again, that's how we change the world. You find your own power
mhm.
to fight the powers that be, or
Is
not even
it?
to fight, just to
Mhm.
to create a resistance against it.
Yeah, I like to counter them.
Yeah, we need to balance the scales and then tip them.
Is it a faith-based group or is it secular? And if it's secular, what's the moral foundation for your
Hmm.
enterprise?
Let's see, moral foundation. Well, I wouldn't say I one of the say the rules, but of the community standards, having respect for anybody's faith is a
Mhm,
part of that.
mhm,
So it's not necessarily rooted in any sort of religious
mhm,
dogma, but having respect for those who have that,
mhm, mhm,
rooted in, I guess the moral would be anybody who's not there to encourage and support is
mhm,
not welcome.
mhm,
And if you're
mhm,
in there to troll and to bring people down or to just be super duper negative about everything, it's probably not the place for you.
mhm,
But if you're ready to like, you know, get your SHIT together and focus on becoming the best version of you, because that's what this world needs you to do, that's what you need to do, then it's definitely the place. And it's a great group of guys, and I think it's going to be awesome.
mhm. Do you do any mentorship of young men or boys, or is it this for just adults?
Well, I I only adults, but I mean,
Okay.
as young as I think my youngest client so far has been 25.
Okay.
And the guys who work with me every time, so all in my coaching program right now, I mean, I have so many generations. So
Mhm.
I think my youngest is 25 and the oldest guy is 74,
Oh, wow.
which is creates a really great dynamic because it's just spanning so much time, and the way that that gels really makes for I don't know, a complete experience and just a real amazing support system just to hear the
Mhm,
different perspectives and
mhm,
to realize we're going through similar things regardless of where and when we were born.
mhm,
But the youngest is 25. In my content, my aim is really to expand towards younger guys.
mhm,
So as I've leaned into being a men's coach and as I've been doing this the last couple of years, my target avatar is my age and younger. I'm
mhm,
40 years old. So I think 25 is like a good 25 to 40 is like a good age range,
mhm,
because it's the mentoring that I wish I would have had at 25.
mhm,
So I think me at 25 is a good stop, or a good age to start with.
mhm,
Um, but if anybody else, if teenage boys find their way to my work, it can only help them as well.
mhm. Well, it seems like a positive and supportive atmosphere, a positive vision of masculinity when it's been so attacked culturally for quite some time
Right.
now with the whole toxic masculinity scheme. And then you see these figures like Andrew Tate out there presenting just like the caricature of what, that looks like. So it's very refreshing to hear this kind of
I'm
supportive perspective.
definitely an optimist. I'll never stop being an optimist.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I try to bring guys back from that extreme as well. And again,
Mm-hmm.
this is like one of those problems of when there's an extreme new trend or ideology that gains popularity, the knee-jerk reaction is go to the other extreme. You know, we're
Mm-hmm.
seeing in the
Mm-hmm.
last like decade or so, you're seeing like this extreme response to feminism, and it becomes this, you know, MGTOW, misogynistic, anti-woman type thing. And even in like the dating advice with the red pill stuff and
Mm-hmm.
game, it dehumanizes women,
Mm-hmm.
and it makes it less about the person and more about like how to psychologically manipulate. And I just think it's not helpful. It's
Mm-hmm.
backwards.
Mm-hmm.
And to jump to such an extreme lacks critical thinking. It lacks, you know, heart. It's
Mm-hmm.
just like taking the opposite stance just to oppose this other thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you see that everywhere. I mean, even now, like there's, you know, the extreme right, extreme left, but there's also like the extreme uh middle, which is the whatever, the extreme what do you call it? The truthers.
Mm-hmm.
They become extreme as well. Now it's at this point where so many people, you know, they hear a news story and they
Mm-hmm.
reject it and they go to the opposite of what that story could be. And now
Mm-hmm.
nothing is real. Everything's a conspiracy. There's no, you know, it's it's everything's extreme.
Mm-hmm.
No matter
Mm-hmm.
how sort of ridiculous some theories can be, they're like they jump to these conclusions because they are so sure that everything is a lie.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the truth is always somewhere in the middle.
Mm-hmm. Well, I really appreciate that perspective, and I really appreciate this candid conversation because
And my pleasure.
it's been an interesting exploration of lots of things, and you've been really open, and I just appreciate you being willing to do it and go into these topics. So
Yeah, my pleasure.
I hope you have great success with that program. And where can people find your work? Do you want to give some links or say some
Yeah,
places where
absolutely.
they can find you?
Yeah. So if any guys out there, if anything I've said resonates with you and you're interested in joining the community, get on the wait list now. I'll provide the link. And then as soon as the doors open, or even a couple days before they open, you'll be the first one to know and you can get in and yeah, join the crew. Uh, Beyond that, if you want to read the newsletter that you read, it's my website, bennywills.com/blog, or just bennywills.com if you want to see my website. I'm also on YouTube, youtube.com/bennywills. I'm on Twitter and Instagram. I'm all over the place. But yeah, if anything I've said has spoken to you, reach out. I'm very easy to find on the internet.
Awesome. Well, I'll put links down in the description of the video, or if you're on a podcast app listening to this, it'll be in the description. So thank you again very much, Benny. It's been great to speak with you.
Thank you, Leslie. It's been a pleasure.